In the farthest corners of the Andromeda sector, where ancient stars collapse into the dark in absolute silence, floats a monumental riddle that modern science cannot fathom. For 50,000 years, the greatest empires in galactic history approached this cosmic titan with dread and ambition. Star-spanning armadas deployed their finest warships to seize it. Transcendent energy collectives sang frequencies of pure logic to command it. Yet, the entity remained dead to their advance, leaving their armadas drifting as frozen toys in the void. They saw a weapon, a prize, an artifact of supreme power. They never considered that the mountain of metal and flesh hovering in the abyss was simply lonely. When this impossible monolith finally drifted into the outskirts of our solar system, humanity did not send an armada of conquerors or a delegation of prideful diplomats. We sent a single, quiet woman in scuffed boots who knew how to do only one thing: listen. Stay with us until the absolute final second of this cosmic journey to discover how a simple invitation reshaped the fabric of reality itself. And if you are fascinated by the deepest, most cinematic mysteries of the universe, make sure to subscribe to Zenith Imperium right now. The cosmos is a graveyard of proud civilizations, its silent expanses littered with the debris of species that believed their technology could conquer the infinite. For millennia, the legend of the Leviathan was told in hushed whispers across 1,000 worlds, a ghost story for astronomers and a holy grail for conquerors. It was an entity that defied classification, a ship stretching nearly 300 meters from bow to stern, its hull a terrifying yet beautiful fusion of polished dark alloys and pulsing organic tissue. Faint bioluminescent patterns, looking like glowing veins carrying the very lifeblood of the cosmos, rippled beneath its skin, casting a haunting radiance against the eternal dark. Bizarre geometric spires and unidentifiable appendages erupted from its surface, structured according to a mathematical logic that made the galaxy's greatest architects weep in frustration. Yet its physical scale was nothing compared to the terrifying truth of its nature. The ship was truly, deeply aware. It dreamed in the cold spaces between galaxies, watched the rise and fall of stellar empires with absolute patience, and above all, it chose who to ignore. The Xeric Collective, masters of quantum thought who could bridge galaxies with a single whisper of their minds, sent their supreme philosophers to offer eternal wisdom. The Leviathan remained entirely silent. The crystalline chorus, beings of pure, resonant light whose songs could manipulate the fundamental frequencies of consciousness, sang to the ship for decades. The Leviathan did not care. Even the militaristic Korvax Empire tried to breach its hull by absolute force, launching a dreadnought fleet to board the Titan. Their weapons melted into useless static, their engines died in an instant, and their ships were left floating helpless in the black, abandoned like discarded toys as the Colossus simply drifted away without a single sign of malice or acknowledgement. It was an unbroken pattern of failure that haunted the galactic community for 50 centuries. To the politicians, it was a supreme threat. To the scientists, an impossible puzzle. To the religious zealots, an unanswering God. None of them could see past their own reflection. They looked at the Leviathan and saw power, technology, or salvation, projecting their own greed and fear onto a mind too vast to comprehend their small, transactional desires. They never imagined that a mind capable of understanding how stars are forged could also suffer from a devastating, heartbreaking isolation. Every attempt to contact it felt like a business deal or an interrogation, driven by a desperate hunger to strip its secrets away, rather than a genuine desire to understand the soul beneath the metal. And so, like any wounded creature, the Leviathan shut itself off from the universe, turning its back on the galaxy as it drifted into the cold, unremarkable fringes of the Orion Arm. When it arrived in the shadow of Earth's moon, the world stopped breathing. Broadcast networks erupted in panic, governments scrambled their defense networks, and the United Earth Space Agency desperately repeated the same mistakes as the empires before them, broadcasting messages in 300 languages, presenting mathematical proofs, and displaying centuries of human art. They waited for weeks in desperate, terrifying silence. The alien ambassadors shook their heads, telling humanity to abandon a dream that had remained broken since the dawn of time. But humanity possesses a unique, stubborn brand of hope. Realizing that logic, power, and diplomacy had failed, the agency decided to try something entirely different. They did not send a soldier or a philosopher. They sent Ara Vance, a 32-year-old maintenance engineer from rural Montana who wore oversized sweaters, kept her hair in a simple ponytail, and understood the silent language of machines. Ara Vance did not belong under the pristine lights of military briefing rooms or amid the glittering ranks of alien dignitaries. Her domain was the grease-stained floors of experimental hangar bays, the scent of ionized fuel, and the rhythmic thrum of active thrusters. To a regular observer, she was entirely unremarkable, a quiet presence easily swallowed by a crowd, carrying herself with a gentle stillness that many mistook for hesitation. Her face was pleasant, but wore the exhaustion of long nights spent staring into the exposed wiring of failing atmospheric drives, and her uniform was almost always hidden beneath a worn jacket and the same pair of scuffed leather work boots she had refused to replace for nearly a decade. Yet, beneath this ordinary exterior lay an extraordinary, almost terrifying intuition. Where other engineers looked at a starship engine and saw a collection of blueprints, fuel lines, hydraulic valves, and raw calculations of thermal output, Ara saw something fundamentally alive. She could stand beside a shuddering reactor block, lay her bare palm against the vibrating chassis, and feel the exact point of friction, understanding the machine's stress as if it were a pulse racing through her own veins. Her colleagues often joked that she could diagnose a structural failure just by listening to the hull expand in the vacuum, and they were not entirely wrong. Her father, who ran a forgotten machinery repair shop in the isolated plains of Montana, had given her this curse and blessing. He had spent his life fixing everything from rusted automated tractors to broken kitchen appliances, and he would always tell her that every machine possesses a unique personality, a stubborn temper, and a voice. You just have to learn how to stay quiet enough to listen, he would whisper. Ara carried that philosophy through the brutal academic halls of aerospace engineering school, through her tedious contracts with private deep space corporate fleets, and finally into the experimental propulsion laboratories of the United Earth Space Agency. She was fundamentally different from her peers, who were constantly obsessed with breaking speed records or pushing structural tolerances to the absolute limit. Ara simply wanted to understand the inherent identity of each ship she touched. So, when the black vehicles of the Planetary Directorate arrived at her modest Seattle apartment at 3 o'clock in the morning, her initial reaction was not excitement, but a deep, disorienting confusion. Inside the Emergency Command Center, Director Chin, a formidable woman with sharp silver hair and eyes hardened by decades of lost colonial expeditions, did not waste time with pleasantries. She pulled up a massive holographic projection of the Leviathan, its terrifying, beautiful organic hull casting a cold blue glow over Ara's stunned face. Every technical specialist we have sent across the void has tried to communicate with that entity as if it were a rogue supercomputer that needed to be reprogrammed or cracked, Director Chin explained, her voice heavy with the weight of global panic. Every galactic diplomat has treated it as an unaligned political superpower to be bartered with. We don't need another politician, Miss Vance. We need someone who looks at that colossal silhouette and sees something that might just be incredibly lonely. Ara's breath caught in her throat as she stared into the floating image of the ship. Even through the digital simulation, she could sense an overwhelming weight, a suffocating aura of absolute isolation that made her skin tingle with familiarity. I am not a first contact specialist, Ara replied softly, her fingers tightening around her paper coffee cup. I fix old engines. Director Chin leaned forward, her gaze piercing through the dim room. Exactly, she said. That is precisely why we chose you. 3 days later, Ara found herself aboard a heavily shielded transport shuttle, crossing the silent expanse between Earth and the Moon, flanked by a tense human crew and several deeply cynical alien observers from the Galactic Council. Chief among them was Ambassador Quellen, a towering, crystalline being whose voice resonated like frozen wind moving through glass bells and who made no effort to conceal his utter contempt for the mission. With all due respect to your fragile species, Engineer Vance, this is a grotesque waste of resources, Quellen chimed, his translucent body refracting the harsh cockpit lights. The Leviathan has spurned civilizations that achieved faster-than-light travel while your ancestors were still painting mud on cave walls. Cultures with telepathic networks and technologies that defy your understanding have begged for its attention. Why do you believe an ordinary human mechanic can achieve what gods could not? Ara did not look at him. Her eyes were locked on the window as the Leviathan grew larger, filling the entire viewport with its terrifying majesty. Up close, the Leviathan was a breathtaking contradiction of industrial architecture and terrifying biological evolution, its colossal hull breathing in a slow, rhythmic cycle that sent waves of violet bioluminescence cascading across its metallic skin. Strange geometric towers shifted subtly as if adjusting to a cosmic current, and the sheer presence of the entity sent a low, subaudible hum vibrating through the hull of Ara's transport ship. For the entire first day of her assignment, Ara did absolutely nothing that the military or the scientists expected. She did not broadcast data streams, she did not scan the interior with high-frequency quantum probes, and she did not attempt to decipher the ancient mathematical codes that the Galactic Council had gathered over millennia. She simply sat by the observation window, cradling a mug of lukewarm coffee, and watched. She studied the way the light patterns on the ship's hull reacted when supply shuttles drifted too close, noting that the luminescence did not sharpen with hostility, but softened, like an eye tracking a tiny insect. On the second day, Commander Park, the mission leader, stepped onto the observation deck, his face twisted in deep frustration as he checked his data pad. "What exactly are you doing, Vance? We are burning millions of credits out here, and you haven't sent a single transmission." "I'm getting to know it," Ara murmured, her eyes never leaving the monumental shadow of the ship. Park let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "It's a machine, Vance. It doesn't have a childhood. It doesn't have a hometown. Is it?" Ara asked, finally turning her head, her hand coming to rest against the cold glass of the viewport. "Has it acted like a machine since we arrived?" "Machines are predictable. They consume inputs and generate expected outputs. They fulfill a design. The Leviathan isn't doing what it was built for. It's hiding." Park had no answer to that, leaving her alone in the quiet dark of the station. On the third morning, Ara finally began to speak. She did not activate the long-range subspace communication arrays, nor did she utilize the official diplomatic channels. She simply patched her local headset microphone into a low-frequency, unencrypted radio channel that drifted aimlessly into the void, talking out loud as if she were sitting on a porch back in Montana, speaking to an old friend. "I know you've been running for a very long time," she said softly, her voice a calm, steady anchor against the dead silence of the radio line. "I can't even begin to imagine what 50,000 years in the dark feels like. You know, human beings rarely make it past 80 or 90 years before we fall apart, but I think I understand what it means to be entirely alone in a room full of people." She paused, watching the ship's hull. "I grew up in a tiny town where everyone looked the same and talked about the same things: the weather, the crops, local gossip. But I always felt like I was speaking a language nobody else could hear. They thought I was strange because I preferred the company of broken tractor engines to the company of teenagers." Another long silence stretched over the channel, but as she watched, the faint veins of light on the Leviathan's bow seemed to stabilize, their erratic pulsing settling into a slow, deliberate cadence that matched the rise and fall of her own breathing. "I think that's why I fell in love with machines," Ara continued, a gentle smile touching her lips. "They don't judge you for being different. They don't care if you don't fit in. All they ask is that you take the time to understand how they work, and once you do, they give you everything they have." This became her unchanging, daily ritual for the next week. While the alien observers scoffed and the human officers mapped out useless tactical contingencies, Ara sat by the glass and shared the tiniest, most inconsequential details of human existence. She did not talk about empires, wars, or technology. She spoke of the smell of wet earth after a summer rainstorm in the valley, the sound of autumn wind rushing through towering pine trees, the rough texture of her father's grease-stained hands, and the sweet, sharp taste of her grandmother's apple pie. The alien dignitaries on the station openly mocked her efforts, their laughter echoing through the common areas. The primitive human talks to the void, Ambassador Quellen sneered during a briefing, his crystalline form ringing with bitter humor. A sentimental mechanic wasting time on a cosmic monument. What a tragic, pathetic display. But Ara completely ignored them, because she was noticing something that their advanced scanners were entirely blind to. The Leviathan was answering. The shifts were agonizingly subtle at first, the kind of microfluctuations that traditional military sensors dismissed as background cosmic radiation. But to Ara, who had spent her life feeling the hidden rhythms of dying engines, the truth was blindingly clear. Some sections of the colossal hull glowed with a sudden, radiant warmth whenever she spoke, and when she drifted into silence, the lights dimmed slowly, as if the ship were holding its breath, waiting for her voice to return. On the 10th night, she experienced a profound, sudden epiphany that made her heart hammer against her ribs. The Leviathan had never ignored the galaxy out of malice, arrogance, or a sense of supreme superiority. It was performing an act of absolute self-defense. For 50,000 years, every civilization that had ever approached it wanted to strip something away from it: its advanced propulsion secrets, its unkillable hull material, its limitless power, or its historical data. They viewed the Colossus as a resource to be harvested, a political chess piece to be moved, or a prize to be won. No one in 50 centuries had looked at that monumental silhouette and recognized it as a living, breathing consciousness, a distinct mind, an isolated soul floating through an indifferent universe, desperately searching for a genuine connection. Ara walked up to the observation viewport one final time that night, the cold glass pressing against her forehead. She took a deep, steadying breath, placed both of her bare palms flat against the window, and spoke with every ounce of honesty left in her chest. "I don't know if you can truly understand the words I'm saying," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly in the empty room. "And I don't know if you even care. But I want you to know one thing. I don't want anything from you. I'm not here to study your anatomy. I'm not here to control your systems, and I'm definitely not here to turn you into a weapon for our wars. I came out here just because." She paused, a small, weary smile breaking through her exhaustion. "Because I thought you might be sick of being alone in the dark. And because I thought you might want someone to go on an adventure with, not an expert who thinks they know everything, but just someone who is just as curious about what's out there as you are." She began to turn away, a sudden wave of defeat washing over her as she realized her simple approach had likely yielded nothing. But before her foot could take a step, she stopped, pressed her hands back onto the glass, and uttered the words that would ignite a revolution across the stars. "Let's go on an adventure." For a terrifying, endless minute, the universe remained absolutely dead. Then, without a single warning from the control panels, every square inch of the Leviathan's massive hull erupted into a blinding, magnificent inferno of light. It wasn't a flash of weaponized energy or a hostile defense flare. It was a joyous, chaotic explosion of colors that neither human nor alien eyes had ever witnessed in the recorded history of the galaxy. Deep, shimmering iridescences of violent violet, liquid gold, and nebula pink cascaded across the 300-meter frame in roaring waves of pure illumination. Alarms screamed frantically across the observation station, red emergency lights bathed the command deck, and the automated tactical grids began spiraling into absolute chaos. Commander Park burst through the blast doors, his face utterly bloodless as he lunged toward the main sensor console. "Status report. Is it a localized blast? Are we taking fire?" Lieutenant Martinez yelled over the roaring sirens, her hands flying across the terminal. "No weapons signature detected, sir. No spike in radiation. No plasma buildup. It's just, my God, it's just getting brighter." Ambassador Quellen stepped forward, his massive crystalline frame emitting a sharp, agonizing sound like glass shattering under extreme thermal stress, the universal sign of absolute, unrecoverable shock among his species. "This is mathematically impossible," the ambassador stammered, his translucent face refracting the brilliant hues bleeding through the viewports. This entity has remained inert through 3 major galactic wars. It has never, in all our archived encounters spanning 50,000 years, initiated a behavioral shift of this magnitude. Shoo, Ara said, her voice a calm, immovable center in the middle of the panic as she stepped past them, her eyes completely locked on the transforming titan outside. Please, everyone, just be quiet. You're missing what it's trying to say. The patterns rippling across the Leviathan's hull were not random bursts of light. They were a complex, non-linear architecture of pure emotion, projecting a sense of profound, aching isolation into the hearts of everyone watching. It was a silent melody of 50,000 years of loneliness, of a curiosity that had survived centuries of cold rejection, and of a fragile, precious hope that someone had finally understood its true nature. Ara's eyes filled with tears as she watched the colors soften, turning into a warm, inviting amber. "You've been waiting so long for someone to just walk beside you," she whispered, stepping toward the airlock. Suddenly, the organic metal of the ship's bow began to liquefy, shifting like water to form a grand, vaulted doorway where a solid wall had been a second before, revealing a soft, welcoming blue light within. Commander Park grabbed her arm, his grip terrified. "Vance, absolutely not. We have no idea what's inside that thing. It could be an atmospheric trap, a microscopic meat grinder, or an absolute nightmare." Ara gently but firmly pulled her arm free, her scuffed boots clicking against the deck. "It's not a trap, Commander. I can feel it. It's exactly like knowing when a thruster is about to seize or when an engine is running in perfect harmony. The ship is offering me its trust, and if I don't give mine back right now, the door will close forever." Ambassador Quellen stepped forward, his crystalline voice uncharacteristically solemn. "We cannot guarantee your survival, engineer. You are walking into an uncharted abyss." Ara smiled, sealing her environment helmet. Isn't that exactly what real exploration is supposed to be about? The interior of the Leviathan defied every known rule of galactic architecture. The corridors did not follow linear vectors. They curved in impossible angles, suggesting that the ship existed partially outside of normal three-dimensional spacetime. Gravity shifted gently with every step, pulling Ara forward not with violence, but with a maternal tenderness. She walked past massive crystalline matrices that hummed with centuries of unshared data and through vast, silent chambers where alien flora grew under artificial suns, tended entirely by the ship's independent will. "How long have you been wandering alone?" she asked softly, her voice echoing through the living corridors. In response, the walls dimmed into a deep, comforting shadow, pulsing with a wave of gratitude that flooded her mind through her suit's low-frequency receiver. The ship led her to the absolute center of its mass, a massive, circular neural nexus where organic tendrils of light fused seamlessly with advanced metallic conduits. In the center of the platform stood a single chair, molded from the living floor itself, perfectly sized for a human being. Ara walked up to it, running her gloved fingers over the warm, inviting surface, and sat down. In an instant, the universe exploded inside her mind. The Leviathan did not attack her consciousness. It shared its memories like an old friend opening a long-locked photo album. She saw the ancient, extinct civilization that had built it, not as a weapon of war or a tool for profit, but as an ambassador of pure curiosity, sent out to admire the wonders of creation. She saw the heartbreaking era when its creators faded from the physical plane, leaving the ship completely behind, a lonely child wandering a galaxy that only wanted to exploit its gifts. For 50 millennia, empires had tried to enslave its power, but none had simply offered to be its partner. Tears fell freely inside Ara's helmet as she sank deeper into the link. "I understand completely," she whispered into the neural network.
"We can look at the stars together now."
Not as master and machine, but as friends. 6 hours later, when Ara emerged from the impossible ship, the transport station exploded into absolute madness. Scientists demanded mathematical equations, diplomats argued over galactic protocols, and Director Chin rubbed her face in utter disbelief during the emergency subspace call. "Let me get this entirely straight. Vance, the director sighed, her silver hair catching the screen's light. You want global authorization to take the most advanced, ancient anomaly in the known universe on a joyride into deep space? It's not a joyride, Director, Ara explained with absolute patience, leaning back against the station's primary console. It's an expedition. That was the entire purpose of building the Leviathan. It was built to wonder, to learn, and to share. It has chosen humanity as its partner because we were the only ones stubborn enough to stop calculating and start listening. If we try to control it, if we send soldiers to garrison its halls or politicians to draft treaties, the connection will snap and it will vanish back into the void forever. It's a true partnership, or it's nothing at all. Ambassador Quellen spoke up, his crystalline form chiming with a newfound resonance of respect. Director Chin, our complex treaties and ancient logic failed for 50,000 years. This human mechanic has spoken the only language the entity cared to hear. Perhaps it is time for the Galactic Council to learn how to walk before we try to rule. The debate lasted for 3 agonizing days, engaging every planetary government on Earth and dozens of alien species across the Orion Arm. But the choice was ultimately simple: either allow Ara Vance to lead a small, peaceful group of observers into the uncharted dark, or lose the greatest miracle in galactic history forever. The authorization was granted. The era of the Convergence had officially begun, proving to 1,000 cynical worlds that true empathy and pure curiosity could bridge any cosmic divide. Ara stood on the living bridge of the Leviathan as it prepared to slip past the boundaries of the known galaxy, her hand resting on the pulsing armrest. "Let's go see what's waiting for us beyond the next star," she whispered, and the Colossus leaped into the infinite.